there are organizations and infrastructure in a field that build and build and build, and the moment that that thing becomes something bigger, like it's channeled or directed, I don't even know. I mean, other people might disagree with this. I don't know that you can predict that moment. It's like when the thing gets channeled and unleashed. But if you don't get that thing without the infrastructure in place. And in my mind, infrastructure is not just like little organizations that move on campaigns. It's really a decades-long strategy where you're building up the constituencies, the leadership development, the communities, the capacity that actually has multiple dimensions to it over time, that's grounded in a vision and grounded in hope, not in stopping things or one issue or another issue, that ultimately leads us to actually have the foundation that we need to unleash what you might call a movement in times. But the story about movements in this country that I think is it's an illusion, is that somehow what happens is sort of like the people rise up. It's just not true. Like, that's just not how it works. Now, in movements, like, a bunch of people might glob onto something. So if you think about it more like how a star forms, there's a nucleus, and then things start like gravitating around it, right? Like, that might be true, but it's not like without the gravitational force at the center, the other stuff has nothing to orbit around. So I think the question for organizing is how to actually set ourselves up not to be small-minded or reactive or think only in terms of my organization, but actually be thinking in terms of long-term infrastructure building, which would lead to movement building. And there's lots of ways that especially I'd say in the last 30 or 40 years, that the field of community organizing in some respects, I'll at least claim that in my part of the world of community organizing has been a little stuck around some of those questions and self-limiting around creating the possibility for this larger movement perspective. But regardless of that, there is all kinds of evidence to suggest that without the infrastructure of organizing and community organizing, you just don't have the kinds of long-term impacts that equal quote-unquote movement.
So why don't we actually building on that, shift into talking a little bit about the role of networks. Like, networks are a relatively, I don't want to say they're a new phenomenon, but.
So networks, in a really, really simplistic way, are basically alignments of organizations across geographies and states to reach greater scale, to be able to work at a national scale or a state scale, that you wouldn't be able to work on by yourself as an organization. So that alignment can be, I think if you look at it, the alignment could be around something like an issue. But then what's sort of more interesting, I think, over time is the infrastructure of networks that exist beyond issues, but exist in terms of we're going to be an alignment over time with a strategy for building power over time. So you have various kinds of networks. But it's the values vision and the hopeful vision of what we can do as Detroit and the Twin Cities and St. Louis and Kansas City. Actually, Cincinnati also had one of these, about places that in some ways feel hopeless and left behind, but we can rebuild them. Like that was really the vision we were kind of moving.